Have you all ever had a time in your life when you had your expectations totally subverted? Yeah. You thought you were going to get one thing and it worked out totally unlike anything you thought you were going to get. Let me tell you about the 2 weeks in my life when I thought I was going to be an archaeologist. I was an anthropology major in college, and one of my two majors. And anthropology was a lot of fun, but there were a lot of the faculty were, let's say, quite advanced in years in that anthropology department. A lot of cultural anthropology. It was wonderful. But one year when I was there was a new professor who showed up, Professor Williams, and she was so cool. She was several decades younger than the rest of the faculty there, and she had just come back from a Khmer dig site in Cambodia, apparently with all kinds of artifacts in tow. She sounded so cool, we all wanted to be part of one of her classes on Khmer archaeology. She even had a leather jacket. Oh yeah, it was serious. So one day I was in class with Professor Williams, and she said, do I have any volunteers who will help me catalog the Khmer artifacts that I've brought back from this dig site? I was like, pick me, yes. I spent the next couple of days looking in the mirror. Would I look good in a fedora? Maybe. Maybe I could wear a leather jacket. I thought this was going to be really cool. I was so excited. What were these mysterious artifacts? I had these visions of Howard Carter opening the tomb, filled with gold relics. So a few days later, I went up to the classroom where Professor Williams was ready for us to start helping her with cataloging. And I came in there, and there were these 6 enormous black plastic trash bags, like 50-gallon trash bags. And I said, what are those? And she said, those are pottery sherds. You know what pottery sherds are? Here's the thing. Most of what archaeologists do is not that exciting. I hate to break this to you. Most of the kinds of things that they're pulling out of the earth, not that this isn't important work, because it is important work in its own way, but most of the things they're pulling out of the earth, not quite as exciting. They're little fragments of pottery. Everywhere you go, any archaeological dig site, anywhere in the world, South America, you go to Asia, you go to the ancient Near East. In fact, I was just at one of these in Israel a few months ago. I even have some pottery shards from that place. Anywhere you go where there's major archaeological digs, there are just endless amounts of pottery shards, broken fragments of pottery, because pottery was one of those things that people used to make huge amounts of all the time. Pottery, pottery, pottery. Every ancient civilization made lots and lots of pottery. And you know what happens to pottery? It breaks. It breaks. And it ends up in trash heaps at any archaeological dig. And archaeologists will go through this stuff and catalog them and eventually put them together, and you can create the pottery and you can learn all kinds of things about it. And so she told us, tell me if you see a bit of dye, if you can see any pigment on the pottery. We had to catalog that. If you see any marks where it might have been in the fire, we'll catalog that, because that tells us things about, when they were using it to cook with, or they put it in their cook fires and boiled something in it. Made a stew. And that sounds pretty exciting maybe for the first 20 or 30 or 300. But I think there were something like 10,000 pottery shards that Professor Williams had brought back from Cambodia. And for the next 2 weeks, that's all that we did, it seemed like, was one after another, IDing them, naming them, writing them in. I don't know about that fedora anymore. I'm not so sure. Sometimes their expectations are subverted. I wasn't going to be Indiana Jones, and archaeologists aren't. Sometimes our expectations are changed in other ways. You know, one of the things that people tended to think about Jesus at the time, one of the expectations that they had about him, was that if Jesus was the Messiah, that he was going to be a leader, a political leader, maybe even a military leader. The Roman army was occupying them. They were part of this there was this hated empire. Imagine living in the United States and having foreign soldiers in garrisons or something. It would be terrible to see. That's the kind of thing the people lived with at that time in the first century. There were Roman soldiers on every street corner in Jerusalem. In fact, at the Temple Mount, I saw this at the Israel Museum when I was there a few months ago. The Romans built a huge watchtower so they could look over into the temple and keep an eye on things. That's how big they built that Roman guard tower in the city of Jerusalem, so they could look into the temple and see what was going on, see if there was any suspicious things happening. And the people really wanted a Messiah who was going to be a political leader, who would rally some troops, maybe lead a rebellion, reclaim the throne of David. And the disciples are kind of always waiting for that. They're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, when is this going to happen, Jesus? Even here at the end, we hear in the beginning of book of Acts today, which is actually the second part of the Gospel of Luke. Of course, Luke is continuing his narrative. You'll notice the disciples say, right here at the end, right as Jesus is about to leave them forever, they say, so Jesus, when are you going to restore the kingdom of Israel? When was that going to happen, Jesus? I mean, it's getting kind of late now. When is this whole kingdom of Israel thing gonna get sorted out? And you notice what Jesus says to them. It's amazing. He says a couple things. First off, he says, don't worry about the time. This is going to sort itself out. And then he says to them something incredible. He says, no. The Holy Spirit is going to come to you. And you are going to be my witnesses in Judea, which is right here, and Samaria, which is over there, and to the ends of the earth. What? Some of the disciples are still back here with this expectation that they're going to have the kingdom of Israel restored, that there's going to be some kind of political revolt that's going to happen, that these Roman oppressors are going to get thrown out. And Jesus gives them something that totally subverts their expectations. He says, no. Yeah, Israel's fine. Don't worry about the kingdom of Israel. Think about Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth. We're not stopping here. We are going so much further than you can even imagine. This isn't about the kingdom of Israel. This is about the ends of the earth. That must have been an incredible thing to hear in the first century, I think. People had a lot of expectations about Jesus that get subverted, that get turned on their heads. You know, they expect Jesus, if you're the Messiah, if you're going to be like a holy figure, shouldn't you be hanging out with holy people? What are you doing at 2 a.m. with the bar crowd at Waffle House, Jesus? That's what they say to him. They say, Jesus, the Pharisees say you're hanging out with prostitutes and tax collectors and sinners. What are you doing? Some people thought if Jesus had to be the Messiah, Jesus had to be pure in every way, keep the Sabbath in a perfect way. And so they catch him and his disciples eating, taking food from the fields, harvesting. And they say, what are you doing working on the Sabbath, Jesus? You're such a bad example. And Jesus says, the Sabbath was made for us, we weren't made for the Sabbath. Flips that thing right on their heads. It's amazing. They say to Jesus, Jesus, why don't you just restore the kingdom of Israel? Why don't you just get up on a white horse and pick up a banner and a lance or something? Lead a charge against the Romans. Instead, he goes into town on a donkey. The only crown he ever wears is a crown of thorns. Jesus subverts their expectations over and over again. Do we have expectations about who Jesus is? Sometimes we hang on to those expectations pretty tightly, I think. Sometimes they come from Sunday school images we've been given, We think of Jesus maybe as being like a really nice, gentle, kind person. And of course he is. But he's not just Mr. Rogers, let me tell you. When there were money changers in the temple, Jesus grabbed a whip and drove those money changers out. It's the only act of violence he ever did in his whole life. He flipped those expectations right on their heads. Do we think we know who Jesus is? We think we have an idea in our minds. We think we have a sense of, we have it pinned down. I know I do that. It's very comfortable sometimes to have an idea of who God is, who Christ is, that we can kind of control, A God who operates the way we expect God is going to operate. A Christ who always does the things or says the things that we expect Christ is going to say. Or hangs out with the kind of people we expect he's going to do. Maybe we have an image in our minds that Jesus is going to say this exact kind of thing, or vote this certain way, or be with these certain kinds of people, or not be. But I think Christ always was subverting people's expectations, turning them on their heads, and making them bigger than they ever could have imagined. The disciples say to Jesus, when are you going to restore the kingdom of Israel? And Jesus says, yeah, Israel, great. You're going to be my witnesses in Judea and in Samaria, of all places, and to the ends of the earth. Talk about blowing their expectations wide open.